Hey everyone, welcome to today's video on affordable housing. So my name's Avin Savani. Thank you for tuning in. And in today's video, we're going to be going over how to actually calculate your LIHTC tax credits and also the basis of an overarching affordable housing strategy. So the first thing that I just wanted to talk about, how to calculate those LIHTC tax credits. I'm just going to share my screen here and show you the basis of my research and how you guys can also build on this if you're interested investing in the affordable housing space. As you're going through this, I'll also explain this thoroughly, but I also recommend checking out Adventures in CRE. That's where I obtained this calculator from. They also have kind of just like a walkthrough video on this. Pretty much outlines the stuff that is needed. It also has like an explanation page on this as well. That's where you can check this out. And all the links are also on that calculator. If you're interested, just go to adventuresincre.com and you'll be able to find this LIHTC calculator. As I'm going through this, this is kind of a review of how to actually calculate it. As you're going through this, the one thing that I recommend starting off the bat is defining your initial strategy in affordable housing. Are you targeting acquisitions and preservation of affordable housing, or are you going for new construction and ground up development? There's different ways to go about both, but just know that with a higher construction budget, you'll most likely be able to qualify for the 9% low-income housing tax credit rule, which allows for increased tax credits. That happens when you have a larger development, you're going ground up, and that construction budget is a pretty big amount. As we're going through this, I'm just going to walk through just the basis of how to get down to this total equity. And pretty much this tax credit equity is going to be replacing your LP equity on your waterfall structure. When you're doing your underwriting, you should also have some type of waterfall structure for the GP and LP. And it should have the return structure pretty much whatever the split is, 80-20, 70-30, whatever it may be. And then also if there's some hurdle rates involved there, the pref return as well. That should all be kind of displayed in your waterfall structure. That helps with doing the contributions and distributions and knowing the exact amount that each side is responsible for. So as we're going through this, the first thing that you're starting off with is your construction budget. With a ground up construction, you're going to have a pretty large construction budget since everything is inclusive essentially. But the things that you need to take out are your ineligible items, such as your non-depreciables. In real estate, the three main ones are land, interest, and insurance. After you subtract out those, you get down to your eligible basis. And now you get down to some adjustments and some fractions. So this high cost adjustment is dedicated to projects that are in difficult development areas, also known as DDAs, and qualified census tracts, also known as QCT. Basically, if your project is in this area, HUD pretty much releases which areas throughout the nation qualify for that. So if your project is in that area, you get an additional 30% boost on top of that. With your high cost adjustment, if you are in that area, you get 130% allocated to your original eligible basis. So after you get down to that, you'll be going towards this applicable fraction, which pretty much explains how many units in your project are dedicated to affordable housing. You can do this on a unit basis or a square footage basis. Within, let's say, 100-unit apartment development, you have 80 units that are affordable housing, and the 20 which are just market rate conventional units. Pretty much 80% will be the applicable fraction, which you'll multiply to your adjusted eligible basis to get down to your qualified basis. So that's how it works. Also for square footage, you can do it based off of the total square feet that are affordable versus the total residential space that is available. So it's kind of dependent on what the developer is looking towards. So let's say most of the affordable units have a higher square footage amount than the non-affordable units, then it might be more favorable to go with the square footage amount. So it depends on what the developer's perspective is. Also, it could depend on whatever your program or your policy initiative requires of that. So keep in mind out for that. So as you get down to your qualified basis now, the 4% rule and the 9% rule is essentially a present value calculation of the 10 full years of tax credits that are on your project. So the typical LIHTC program is going to last for 10 years, unless it's permanent affordable. But for a 10-year LIHTC program, this 4% is essentially a present value calculation. So what you do is you equal that present value. As we're going into this next slide, I'll show you this. So you equal your present value to 30%. If it's a 4% rule, equal it to 30% of the qualified basis. So that's how it kind of works. And then if it's the 9% rule, you allocate 70% to your qualified basis. But how this rate essentially is calculated is essentially the discount rate is based on the applicable federal rate. So the IRS pretty much posts monthly or they update what the actual applicable federal rate for that month is. So you can use the midterm rate and the long-term rate, average that out, and then get down to your actual discount rate for that 4% rule. So after you get to your 4% discount rate, you're going to be multiplying that rate by the qualified basis to get down to your tax credit amount per year. So you can multiply that by 10 to get your total length of your tax credits over the lifespan of the LIHTC program. And then some minor adjustments after that is you're going to have a cost per dollar of tax credit. So it's a tax credit factor. So per dollar, there's going to be a unit worth for the actual tax credit. So it might be 95 cents per dollar, 98% tax credit per dollar. So that's how it kind of works on that end. So you adjust that and you get down to that total equity amount, which you can use to replace the LP equity in your waterfall structure. So that was just a quick overview of how this works. If you actually want to know the nuances on how to calculate it, be sure to check out Adventures in CRE for that. So yeah, and now kind of continuing off of that, I'm going to be reviewing kind of the step-by-step program in affordable housing, not program, sorry, investment strategy and development strategy in affordable housing. So some people, I highly recommend just communicating with development companies in your area that target affordable housing. For my area, since I'm from Philadelphia, a company called Penrose is very active in my market in the Northeast area. Also down south to the Washington, D.C. area, Standard Communities is another company. And also to the mid-central markets, Holiday Ventures is another company that I've networked with in the past. So definitely recommend kind of just knowing your affordable housing landscape and the markets that you're interested in. So as a young entrepreneur like me, based in Philadelphia, I like to know about what's happening in my area, the development projects as well. So some news sources that I utilize to keep up to date, and also review the qualified allocation plan, which is submitted yearly, as well as the housing action plan, which each city or also county should submit per year, or sorry, every 5 years. It's kind of like a 5-year plan. That is something that you should also review as well. So some sources that I use that are really great and kind of introduced me to the affordable sector. Local Housing Solutions is a free resource that you can use. They have like the step-by-step guideline of how to plan, analyze, act, fund, refine, and then bridge. So that's kind of like their motto, but it's very cool. They also have case studies per area. They don't have like all the areas, but pretty much the major MSAs they also have. So, which is really cool. So, yeah, they have one here in Philadelphia. So that's how I got introduced to the affordable space. So highly recommend checking them out. And then just like actual news that is happening just like on a monthly basis, and news on like development companies closing on projects, going through like the planning phase, and kind of like the prospective deals like in the pipeline. Affordable housing finance pretty much covers all of that news. So it's fantastic. It pretty much overviews the policy and legislation, the financing programs associated with affordable housing, as well as companies' management and operational plans associated with the projects. So yeah, highly recommend checking that out. And that'll give you a good kind of jumpstart into the affordable and learning, becoming more knowledgeable in the affordable space. So yeah, and now as we go into this, so I kind of base this framework off of a lot of companies that were doing activity that I've been following for a while. One person, his name is Evan Holiday, a CEO of Holiday Ventures. He actually produced some videos on how to go about a multifamily affordable housing project from start to finish. So I kind of like took some notes on that, and I just wanted to share that, and seeing like where I can kind of put my own style on that and build off of that. So yeah, so the main thing with affordable housing is just knowing your strategy. So are you targeting preservation of affordable housing or ground up construction? And the result of that is, with ground up construction, you have a larger construction budget. You might be able to qualify for the 9% rule, but just know some downsides with the 9% rule is that you won't be able to qualify for tax exempt bonds associated with that. So 4% LIHTC projects qualify for tax exempt bonds, and you can get some more favorable terms in accordance to that program. So you get probably like lower interest rates, you get some more flexible terms related to that. So that's kind of where I like to kind of begin, is just knowing those risks involved with each program. And also just knowing your strategy. So the most common strategy is a public-private partnership. So with that, you're partnering with your lender and your tax credit equity investor. It could also be the same company providing the most of the capital stack to your project. But that's kind of how it starts. And then also nurturing those relationships with the city council, the city economic development committee, as well as the planning committee. So it helps to kind of solidify those relationships off the bat. And ultimately, it just shows that you're active in this market. You're more motivated to actually take on a project and provide or impact the affordable sector. So that's really important. And then also the unit count that you're targeting. So maybe you start off with like a medium-sized multifamily, ranging from like 10 units all the way up to 50 units. And then you kind of master that business plan and you scale that to a larger unit count. So that's how kind of like I recommend just starting off, just taking on maybe a preservation deal as well, and an acquisition normal like LIHTC 4% program project, and just seeing how it works, how the operational plan works, how all like the committee, the city council meetings work, establishing those relationships with like a member on that board, getting all the necessary documents that you need from them, the approvals, and seeing how you can close on that project. So that's how the start of a project could start out, or start of a excuse me, start of a company could start out. Just gonna get some water here. Excuse me on that. But yeah, so it's really important when you're going in, just solidifying this strategy because it can definitely have impacts later down in your development process. So again, targeting like DDAs or QCTs, that's another strategy where you can gain higher tax credits with that high cost adjustment boost. And then also choosing your market. So I recommend maybe starting with maybe 2 markets, 3 markets at the most, understanding that political landscape, as well as the economic landscape in that area as well. So a big kind of controversial not statement, but a controversial topic in the industry is developing in resource-rich versus low-income neighborhoods. So for instance, if you're targeting a program where it's very high percentage to the AMI and the residents in that area are very struggling mightily with their lives and gaining stability, financial stability, it's definitely tough to see the positives in that neighborhood. But I think if you communicate with other development companies who either develop like shopping centers, strip centers, grocery stores, retail office, all of that, and you kind of communicate with them and say, hey, we're trying to implement a good strategy here to revitalize and stimulate the economy in this local neighborhood, which is struggling heavily. So that's another initiative to take on. And then the resource-rich areas, it can definitely depend what type of tenant mix that you attract to that. It can definitely be mixed income housing, but with that, you really need to see how you can impact that area with your project. And you can definitely be more picky about like your location, but just know that there's trade-offs between your quantity, your quality, and your location. So that's very important. And with your location, like some criteria that you can ask your broker about is we like to invest in up and coming neighborhoods that are in transit-oriented areas where easy access to transportation. It also has a good vibrancy of local economies and poised for economic growth, essentially. So that's something to just communicate with your broker about, and seeing what type of land acquisition that you can take on to develop or start your project. So yeah, and then also just understanding the pro forma assumptions is critical. So within a pro forma, you have your rent growth, you have your average rents in that area, you have your occupancy, vacancy levels in that area, your operating expense ratio as well as the property taxes and the overall capital expenditure growth that you're projecting in that area, depending on obviously the condition of the project. So with taxes though, so with affordable projects, some can actually just the taxes can be avoided altogether, just given the tax credit nature of the project. So it might be wise to just check in with your policy and see if those property taxes can be avoided altogether throughout the life cycle of the deal. And that's also like one of the incentives that many tax credit equity investors have, is that given just the amount of governmental support that you have for your project, you can definitely qualify and avoid or get a tax rebate through that LIHTC program. So that's something to watch out for and can definitely be advantageous for developers. Yeah, and then just aligning your funding resources, your policy initiatives and programs, as well as your location. That's kind of like the foundation of your project. And from there, it's a matter of once you actually put the project under contract with the broker. And that's another thing I want to talk about. So it's advantageous to acquire governmental land With that, you can definitely space out the timeline and have a more flexible timeline under contract. Whereas if it's privately owned land and that landowner wants to pretty much close on their project and realize a profit like instantly, maybe like a 60-day due diligence or a 90-day due diligence timeline, it's not as feasible with an affordable housing project, which can last like upwards of 2 to 3 years in planning, right? So that's another thing to just watch out for. And with that, it might be just better to acquire that piece of land that is privately owned, especially if you like that area a lot, with some pre-development budget, right? So you can finance your pre-development costs either through a joint venture partner or an institutional retail partner. You can also get it through a local grant program such as community development block grants or home funds or the housing trust fund, or some type of pilot program within your local jurisdiction. And just know that you'll probably get refunded for those pre-development costs later on if your project is actually successful, right? So yeah, and then other things, zoning is a huge topic in the affordable space. So having your property and your land zoned correctly with the right density is very necessary. And you can also communicate with your architect and strategize like, hey, how many units are we planning to develop in this plot of land? And do we need to increase the density and rezone, upzone essentially, to allow that increased unit count, right? So yeah, and then the site survey process is also pretty much inclusive, and drafting that site plan with your engineers. Some other initial reports. This list can definitely be ongoing, and there's probably a lot more to go through this. But these are just some that come to mind. So your environmental phase 1 and phase 2, your soils and geotechnical reports, your FEMA floodplain reports, also this schematic and pre-development design from your architects. So what you're going to be using to present to your city council member, and then eventually the actual full city council, or also the city economic development team and the planning team, is your concept narrative, as well as the site plan and the architectural design plan to them. So it's recommended that for the first meeting, having just like one contact within the city council membership is really crucial, just to advocate for your project and your company, and then presenting that to the actual city council, which can definitely take a lengthy period because they also have many projects coming in their pipeline that need approvals, and communicating with a lot of other development companies in the area for sectors other than affordable housing too. So they have their own schedule, so have to be mindful about that. But yeah, so this concept narrative is essentially just outlining your entire project. So this can be in a PowerPoint format, and pretty much explaining why you like this area so much, how you can impact people's lives with providing quality and affordable housing to people who are struggling with housing stability, essentially, right? So that narrative you also want to convey to your lender, your investors, and other stakeholders involved with your project. And once you do that, you'll get some type of letter of support from the council members or the mayor to present to your lenders and tax credit equity investors. So that's a very important letter of support that the mayor or a senator or even some council members can draft up and advocate for your project. Yeah, and then also at this point, it's very important to engage your development team. So your architect, your civil, your structure, your MEP engineers, your general contractor, your property manager, and also obtaining some rough quotes from them as far as the construction budgeting, right? So with your property manager, just outline kind of like the scope of the property management agreement, and the fee that they'll be charging to manage your property in the long term. So that's a fixed expense that you can negotiate right off the bat. And then also just understanding that property management's team and how diversified their team is. So depends on the unit count, really. So if it's a larger unit count, it's better to have a pretty diverse staff on board. So ranging from the leasing professionals to let's say like the concierge services, to the actual maintenance staff on board, and also having all your contract services in line to manage your asset, as well as like having some licensed brokers do the marketing to attract tenants. So that's very important to have a diverse property management team. And as we go through this, the other thing for the construction budget, this will be kind of later down the road. One challenge I think with this is matching the construction budget to the actual amount that the tax credit equity investors and also your loan, your bond that is going to provide. So that's something that is a challenge to kind of get on the same page about, and also justifying all of the different construction budgeted items that you have with rough quotes from subcontractors. So that's another thing to watch out for. But yeah, and then as you submit your design plans, once you kind of finalize that with your architects and engineers, you should submit that to the city council, get approvals for permits, especially if it's like a demolition permit, but also you're kind of drafting your development agreement with the city council and getting construction permit approvals and all the necessary permits that are needed for that project, like parking permits, all the subcontractor that are going to be performing work, pulling permits on them as well. So that's also very important. And then also just addressing any feedback that they have from those design development plans, and seeing if you can have a third party, that can just be your architect, just review that and fix any issues or challenges that they had in mind. So yeah, and then as you start your application, just know the time window. So with your tax credit and your bond, there's going to be a specific time window that the state agency will allow to submit all of those applications. So it's probably going to be very competitive with a lot of other development companies doing their own projects. So it's very wise to know that time window and get your applications in on time, right? So once you do that and you get approved for your bond and your tax credit, you get your pre-approval letter essentially. You're going to have that commitment letter from the tax credit investors and also your bond, your loan, your lender essentially, and you're going to submit that to them as well. So or sorry, you obtain the tax credit and bond commitment letter from the state agency and you submit that to the lenders and the investors. So yeah, and then it's also very wise to rely and have your own in-house tax credit counsel, which consists of your attorney, your CPA, right, to know pretty much all the legal language, and also knowing the ins and outs of that qualified allocation plan and the housing action plan in general. So they're going to be very helpful to draft all of your contracts, your legal contracts. So for instance, your LOIs and purchase and sale agreements for your land acquisition, and then your limited partnership agreement, your operating agreement, private placement memorandum, and subscription agreement. So essentially, this is a syndication if we think about it, right? So you need all the necessary documents that are geared towards filing a registered syndication deal with the SEC, right? So that's very important to establish off the bat, and your attorney can also help later down the road with your lease agreements, your tenant estoppels, SNDAs, and all the operational contracts that are associated, right? So yeah, and then it's also very important to comply with your lender and your tax credit equity investors due diligence checklist. So just think about it. They're pretty much providing like 80 to 90% of your capital stack. So they're bringing in a good amount of money to your project to actually have it work and have the financing in place for your project, right? So they're going to be doing a bunch of due diligence on your project, asking a bunch of questions, and just making sure that they're mitigating as much risk as possible. So that's another thing to keep in mind, and staying prepared with all the different things like market report, data analytics that you've performed throughout your underwriting, and also all the different third-party relationships that you've had communicated in the past. Having all of that information available and explaining that thoroughly is very important. So yeah, and then once you get down to kind of like the closing period of your contract, you're gonna make sure that you have clear title, that there's no clouds or liens associated with your land, and that that the title abstract and the chain of title is essentially clean and ready to go. So that's another thing you should communicate with your title company about. Just making sure that you're you got the green light essentially to proceed with the closing process. And then draft 8609 is from the IRS for LIHTC programs. So this is essentially the approval form that you need to submit as well to the IRS. And essentially, you also have to have all the compliance docs, like from state agency, all the HUD approval forms. So maybe you have some Section 8 vouchers that you had to go through for your tenants. So having all the HUD approval forms signed and notarized as soon as possible is very important. And then once you close on your deal and you get your project funded, you're going to get this notice to proceed letter, essentially just notifying the construction team that they're ready to go, start construction, and their scheduling can start from there. So that's another important thing to notify them about. And now for the developer fee, so essentially, after doing all this legwork, the developer is going to have some type of fee given to them by the tax credit equity investors, right? So they're going to collect their developer fee, and then also they could possibly get refunded for some of those pre-development costs that they incurred in the beginning. So yeah, and then having just like monthly owner architect construction meetings, and also just supervising construction. And this is another thing that I recommend. So having your own construction manager in-house, following up with the construction team and the general contractor, making sure that things are on time, the materials and labor is also on site and ready to go, and just making sure that things are kind of going as planned is really important. Yes, you'll have to pay some type of construction management fee to that construction manager, but I think it's well worth it, because you save a lot of costs in the long term in that initial construction budget, and you're also just having the best interests for the owner in mind. So that's very important. And again, I've kind of stressed this in the past, that construction management at agency is the best way to go, and having those subcontractor contracts directly with the owner is best. So yeah, and I also made a video on just going through the entire architect and engineer design development phase in the past. So feel free to check that video out. But yeah, so those monthly meetings are critical, and also getting the architect's approval for quality assurance as well as accuracy to their plans that they drafted. Also, like having your engineers on site, your site engineer, your structure engineer, just reviewing how the project is progressing. That's very important as well. And now you can also organize your construction draw schedule. So with your contractor, it's better to have payment for performance. So depending on how much of the scope of work that they've completed, that's how much you should kind of organize your draw schedule to compensate their performance. So you can do it in like a 4 or 5 step process, where Let's say they do all the site excavation, they perform grading, they develop the underlying utilities, and they get the project skeleton constructed. So maybe that could be like 40 to 50% of your project, right? And then with the MEP work, and then the furniture, fixture, equipments, and the interior and exterior finishes and the landscaping, that's the other 50%, right? So just seeing like as the property and the project progress, having that construction draw schedule in periodic payments is a better strategy to compensate, I think. So yeah, and then the other thing is there's a balance between political and the actual operational and technical work that is being performed, right? So as you're doing your project, it's very important to engage all of your stakeholders, all the third parties and partners that help get your project to where it is at this moment. So planning like a groundbreaking ceremony, inviting all the partners involved, such as city council. If you had a nonprofit organization give support, then having them involved, state agency and the housing authority, the city economic development team and the planning committee team. And also if you can get like the state senators and the mayors to show up as well, and the design development, finance and operational team, which has done the hard work and pretty much the main like portion of your project, and also your investors and maybe some residents that have filed for leases to stay in your facility. Having like everyone at this groundbreaking ceremony appreciating all the hard work and effort that everyone has put into the project, and just acknowledging that we couldn't have you couldn't have done this without everyone. I think that's an important step to take, and that just shows better PR and also advocates for future projects that you could have in the future. So yeah, and the other thing is having that final walkthrough with your owner architect construction team and also your property manager, just reviewing all the interior exteriors. Maybe there's some special management techniques for the water, sewer, or the gas chambers, right? So having also your maintenance staff with your property manager, just reviewing everything that is needed to operate and maintain it efficiently is a wise idea. So yeah, and then also your property manager is essentially going to be responsible for the actual performance of this project. So just giving all the confidence to them and saying that, hey, we really love your company, and we envision it to produce and perform well over the long term, and just kind of like blessing them in that sense is very important. So yeah, and then they can also start their like pre-marketing or also just full-on marketing, listing units on like apartments.com, homes.com, hot pads, like wherever they use to advertise their units is another important step. And ultimately, that lease review is also very important. So depending on the type of leases that you have, maybe they're Section 8 vouchers. So having your tax credit counsel just review those leases thoroughly, making sure that they comply maybe to like the HUD's criteria is also very important. So yeah, and then you should also obtain your certificate of completion and your certificate of occupancy. And once you reach stabilization, so this could take maybe like 6 to 12 months to reach stabilization. But once you reach stabilization, that's when you can obtain the full tax credits from your tax credit equity investors, right? So they have a different definition maybe for stabilization, but I guess the general guideline that I've seen is 90% for 90 days. And also just making sure that all the budgeted items within your pro forma are in line with the actuals that you've paid to all the subcontractors involved, right? and also your team involved as well. So yeah, and then that's that. And then also another important step is once you reach stabilization and you qualify for all of those tax credits, you get them contributed from the investors. I think at this point it's very important to consider refining out of your recourse debt, which is normally what is associated with an acquisition loan or a ground up development loan, and then refining that out into a non-recourse debt, which does not tie collateral to your personal assets, and just ties the collateral to the actual project, right? So that's another important step. And then performing ongoing asset management, essentially managing the manager, is another important step. So pretty much scheduling like bi-weekly calls with them, getting updates on the occupancy or vacancy levels, the touring activity with tenants. Is there any tenant issues that they've came across in the past? How are collections? How are the maintenance issues being handled, if there are any? And then also in the future, just realizing how long those leases are in place, and a strategy for renewals, or also maybe spending more money on like leasing commissions or marketing expenses to attract future tenants to keep that or maintain that occupancy level that is above 90%. So those are some ongoing asset management duties. And with asset management, it's really a matter of knowing construction as well. So performing like construction management is really key. And also handling like the financing and the financials of that property, performing like data analytics and portfolio analytics to present to your tax credit equity investors on like a monthly basis is also important. So there's many duties involved with asset management, but that's kind of just like the basics of how to go from start to finish, so from the ground up, how to build your project and all the different nuances and agreements, contracts, all the third-party relationships, and all the different policy compliances that you have to follow with that LIHTC 4% or 9% program. So that was just a quick overview of how that works. And then if you're also interested, like myself, I'm very interested in the financing aspect of it. So I highly recommend just going through the three main providers for affordable housing, which are Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and HUD. So they also post on their website all the different products that are out there. So for preservation, they have a bunch of programs for tax exempt programs, which mainly is for the 4% LIHTC program. They have that. They have taxable programs, which obviously the 9% one is for, and some other interesting products as well. So yeah, and then on the Fannie Mae side, pretty much similar types of programs. So affordable housing preservation, they have some short-term loans, floating rate loans, and some refinance programs when developers are ready to refinance out. So some very cool options out there. So if you're interested, just check out these websites and see where you can gain some knowledge. So they have pretty much term sheets. So you can just click on one term sheet and you'll be able to understand all the different items involved there. So essentially the eligible borrowers, your eligible property types, your AMI requirements as well, your product description, your DSCR requirement, your LTV requirement, the minimum occupancy, and other types of like carve outs and prepayment penalties and other nuances like that. So yeah, that's a cool thing to watch out for and just learn more about. So if you guys found this video helpful and you'd like for me to make more videos on not only just the affordable space, but on multifamily in general, so student housing, regular apartment buildings, interesting strategies that are involved in the space, just feel free to reach out to me, and would love to connect and network with you. So yeah, appreciate you guys just watching this video, and have a great day. Thank you.